I think until I started writing about the flat earthers more than 10 years ago, they were very poorly known, and in fact they're very poorly known now. I've made, I can't make a very big impact, but
you've made them more popular than they've made themselves then, huh?
Probably. I think that there's a lot to be learned from them. I think that well, I'm not interested only in flat earthism. I'm not interested only in creationism. I'm not interested only in Velikovsky and perpetual motion schemes and all of these kinds of things. I'm interested in the mindset that underlies that, and in the structure of anti-knowledge, I guess you might call it. And one of the things that you find is if you start reading this literature, is it all sounds the same. It all sounds very much the same. The first time I ever heard a creationist speaker, the first one I heard was Duane Gish, who's well known. I had just read this thing. I just located a copy of this, which is very rare, and read it. So I went to hear this guy speak at a Lutheran church in South Minneapolis. And I was astonished. I was just struck by how much he sounded like this. You had to change, structurally, the arguments he was making were exactly like the flat earth arguments. Well, I find that throughout unorthodox literature, and it took me a while to figure out why that's true. And that is, there are only a finite number of ways that you can deny reality. There are only a finite number of fallacies of informal reasoning. And so the toolkit of these people is limited. There are only a finite number of behaviors that they can use to deny reality, and so they all fall upon them without ever necessarily reading any of each other's stuff. That's why they all sound the same.
How would you outline these insights that you've gotten? In other words, how would you categorize these similarities if you were to simply give a quick review of the types of fallacies that they employ?
Oh, gee. I've got a list at home. I can just name some. Out of context quotation. Just appeals to authority in general. If you find one person, one place, who ever said anything that is favorable to your view, that becomes the gospel. If there are 10,000 scientists in a discipline, one of them says something that is good, he's the expert. If the other, 9,999 disagree with him, you never hear about them. So appeals to authority, selection, not just of authority, selection of data. For instance, to go with the creationists, they like to talk about that there are overthrusts in the fossil, in the geologic column, that are sometimes difficult to explain, to prove that they are overthrusts. Well, they can't explain anything about the fossil record, and here they're knocking one little glitch, in conventional science. I'll give you an example of selected data. In here, Rowbottom's, one of his favorite things was he'd talk about lighthouses. That such and such a lighthouse, and you can look this up in the standard reference, the height of the light is so far above the water, and here's a report from HMS whatever, who saw this ship, or saw this lighthouse at 51 miles, and it should only have been visible at 30 miles, obviously there's something wrong. Well, a critic of flat earthism actually took looked up all of his lighthouses that he used in a standard reference, which listed like 1,000 or 2,000 lighthouses, and he found that Rowbottom had found every single one of them in there that there was an anomalous report for, So selecting the data, selecting your arguments. Some really devious things. Richard Proctor, who was astronomer and journalist, science journalist, sort of the 19th century English Isaac Asimov, if you will, used to accuse Rowbottom of being a fraud. He didn't think Rowbottom believed his own stuff. And for a while, I had the same view of Duane Gish. I didn't understand how anyone could make such thoroughly dishonest arguments if they actually believed their own stuff. I now understand that people can. That delusion goes deeper than I thought. But Rowbottom had this wonderful argument that he used to use about eclipses of the sun. Now, or I'm sorry, eclipses of the moon. Eclipses of the sun are easy if you're a flat earther. I mean, the moon moves between the earth and the sun, the observer's position. No problem. But if you're a flat earther, how do you have an eclipse of the moon? Well, he postulated that there was an unseen dark body up there that sometimes got in front of the moon. It wasn't the shadow of the earth at all. And why, sure, these astronomers can predict when eclipses can happen, but eclipses are cyclical phenomena. There's the Saros and the Metonic cycle and a whole bit of... He said, you know, eclipses were predicted long before modern astronomy, which is sort of true. Then he'd tell a story like this. On such and such a date, so-and-so observed an eclipse of the moon. And he saw the sun and the moon both above the horizon at the same time. If that's so, how can you possibly say that eclipses of the moon are caused by the earth moving between the sun and the moon? Well, in fact, that if you think about it, that occurs at every eclipse, because people at the terminator, you got one body here and one here, people right sort of on the line. Atmospheric refraction lifts objects on the horizon anywhere from 1/2 degree, 3/4 of a degree, with anomalous conditions over a degree. Well, the semi-diameter of the moon and the sun are both about 16 minutes of an angle, about 1/4 of a degree. So unless you have anomalous atmospheric conditions, if you're in the right place on Earth, you will see that at every eclipse. But of course, the people in the pews didn't know that when he was making that argument, and it was very successful. So those kinds of games. Yes?
Yeah, I think I read an article by Velikovsky maybe 10 years ago. Is he still around? Is he still
No, he died in like 1981, 81, somewhere in there.
Is there a body of people that follow his teachings still?
Well, actually, yes, there are. He does have somewhat of a following. For many years, they published a little journal called Chronos, and it's recently been suspended. They've just quit publishing it. They claim that they might resume at some point, but they have not. Without the master around, it's kind of hard, I think, to keep that one going. But the Velikovskyism is sort of a strange cult. I interviewed Velikovsky 6 days before he died, and he was still trying to tell me how he had predicted all these things about what would be found on the moon with the Apollo landings and so forth. And one of the things that these people do in the lines of fallacious thinking is they do exegesis on their own stuff. Velikovsky, after something happens, they say, I predicted that. And Velikovsky would go back to his books, and when it was discovered, for instance, that Venus had a very hot atmosphere, he went back, and sure enough, there was a sentence or two in one of his books in which he said that, Venus is hot. He claimed that Venus was a comet that was blown out of Jupiter. But in another place, he said that the plagues, the Old Testament plagues of flies, were vermin that came from the comet as it passed by the earth. So in another place, Venus is inhabited by vermin. Now, how it could be inhabited by vermin when the atmosphere is 700 degrees or whatever it is not clear to me. But, he had a lot of bets covered. So he would then go back and look in his book and find something and say, yeah, see that? See that? I was right all along. Nobody else predicted that, even though a lot of people did predict that Venus would be hot. So like that. I wish I could answer better your question of, you know, for an itemized list of the mental games. I think I do have one at home, but I can't reel them off the top of my head. It's not something I've been thinking about a lot lately, so.